So we are again in the kingdoms of the little life. And Ashwapati is seeing at first a dim, obscure mind power. And this mind power is moving, concealed by matter and dumb life. So in this plane of existence, what is he seeing actually? He's seeing the we can say the evolution of an obscure mind power that moves, but it's concealed by matter and silent life. And then what else does he tell us here? He tells us that a current thin, it's streamed in life's vast flow, tossing and drifting under a drifting sky, amid the surge and glimmering tremulous wash, released in splash of sense and feelings waves. Oh, this is powerful. He says, you see, it's only a thin current, but it is streaming in this vast flow of life. But as it streams, it's also tossing and drifting under this drifting sky. Amid the surge and glimmering, tremulous, trembling, quivering wash that is released in a splash of sense and these waves of feeling. So we are in this deep midst of an insentient world. In the deep midst of an insentient world, its huddled waves and foam of consciousness ran, pressing and eddying through a narrow strait, carrying experience in its crowded pace. So we see that the compressed sense of this world. It's an insentient world, no doubt, without feeling, without sensation or consciousness. And in this deep midst of this insentient world, with its huddled waves and foam of consciousness, what is running? This current is running, pressing and eddying through a narrow strait. A strait is a passage of water that it connects two larger bodies of water. So we see how narrow it is, pressing and eddying. Eddying, of course, is a whirling motion back and forth at variance with the main current, I would say. So we see that it's pressing and eddying through this narrow strait and carrying experience in its crowded pace, but not great experience, obviously. But we're going to see what happens now. It flowed, emerging into upper light, from the deep pool of its subliminal birth. And we've often talked about subliminal, so one can go to the lexicon or to Sri Aurobindo's works and just type in subliminal. To reach some high existence still unknown. So it is making an attempt, but it's an attempt from this deep pool of its subliminal birth, where it's flowing and just emerging into upper light. But what happens, it's trying to reach some high existence that is still unknown. But there was no thinking self. Aim there was none. All was unorganized stress and seekings vague. So it is struggling to reach this high existence that it doesn't know about. It's an unknown existence. But it doesn't have this thinking self, and it doesn't even have an aim. Everything is unorganized, stress, vague seekings. Only to the unstable surface rose sensations, stabs and edges of desire, and passion's leaps, and brief emotions' cries, a casual colloquy of flesh with flesh, a murmur of heart to longing, wordless heart, glimmerings of knowledge with no shape of thought, and jets of subconscious will, or hunger's pulls. So, what is happening now? In its attempt to reach a high existence that is still unknown to it, it's attempting to reach it with no thinking self and no aim. Everything is just organized stress and vague seekings. But on this unstable surface, there rose the following things: sensations, stabs, and edges of desire, and passion's leaps, and brief emotions' cries, a casual colloquy of flesh with flesh, a murmur of heart to longing, wordless heart, glimmerings of knowledge with no shape of thought, and jets of subconscious will, or hunger's pulls. So we have to go slowly through this. We're seeing that this attempt to reach a high existence only rising to this unstable surface are sensations, stabs are thrusts here, thrusts or plunges, and edges of desire. And now there are leaps of passion and even brief cries of emotion. Now, there is, of course, a casual colloquy of flesh with flesh. Flesh is a dialogue, colloquy is a dialogue. Usually it's a formal conversation. And therefore, there is this conversation of flesh with flesh, and there is a murmur of heart to longing, wordless heart. Glimmerings of knowledge. Glimmerings, of course, are just faint lights shimmering with no shape of thought. And jets are something that shoots forth, jets of some conscious will, or the pulls of hunger. In the Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo tells us, the subconscious in us is the extreme border of our secret inner existence where it meets the inconscient. It is the degree of our being in which the inconscient struggles into a half consciousness. And Sri Aurobindo is going to continue now about this little life. All was dim sparkle. Look at the words he uses: glimmering, sparkle, and edges, stabs, sensations, stress, seekings. All of these things, all was dim sparkle on a foaming top. It whirled around a drifting shadow self. And here we have the word hyphenated. So it becomes one word, shadow self, on an inconscient flood of force in time. So we have this inconscient flood of force in time, and this shadow self is whirling around it. But even it's a drifting shadow self. So what happens next? There's so much here. Huh? Then came the pressure of a seeing power. Power always means strength and force that drew all into a dancing, turbid mess, circling around a single luminous point, center of reference in a conscious field, figure of a unitary light within. This needs some looking at. First of all, he says, excuse me, then came the pressure of a seeing power. And Sri Aurobindo capitalizes the word power here. Very, very important to keep that into our consciousness. Keep that in our consciousness. And what did this power do? It drew everything into a dancing, turbid mess. Turbid is muddled, clouded, opaque, even obscured. A turbid mass. Now, what is that turbid mass doing? It's circling around a single luminous point. And that luminous point is the center of reference in a conscious field. It's even the figure of a unitary light within. Unitary, of course, is something that is directed towards unity. It lit the impulse of the half-sentient flood. Now, sentient is, of course, conscious, but here it's only half-sentient, half-conscious flood. Even an illusion gave of fixity. And then Sri Aurobindo says, as if a sea could serve as a firm soil. But then he says, that strange observing power imposed its sight. It forced on flux a limit and a shape. It gave its stream a lower, narrow bank, drew lines to snare the spirit's formlessness. Oh, it's a strange observing power, this power that controls things and imposing its sight. It forced on flux. Flux, of course, is fluctuation, frequent change, such as radiant energy, particles, everything always a flux. It forced on this flux a limit and a shape. It gave its stream, this flux's stream, a lower narrow bank. It drew lines to snare the spirit's formlessness. Now we see what is it doing. Now Sri Aurobindo makes it much clearer to us. It fashioned the life mind of bird and beast, the answer of the reptile and the fish, the primitive pattern of the thoughts of man. Very, very early, very primal here. It's just snaring all these lines of the spirit's formlessness, and therefore it fashions the life mind of bird and beast. And we know all about the instinctual life mind of the bird and beast, the answer of the reptile and the fish, all instinctive. But then also the primitive pattern of the thoughts of man, the early thoughts of man. First of all, protect himself. Secondly, get food. Third, procreate. So these are the primitive patterns of the thoughts of man. And Sri Aurobindo tells us next, it's a finite movement of the infinite. What did that movement do? It came winging its way through a wide air of time. Semicolon. A march of knowledge moved in nescience. And again, nescience in nature is the complete self-ignorance. And guarded in the form, a separate soul. So we see in this kingdom of the little life that there is some force that wants to rise a bit higher. And we see this thing come winging its way through this wide air of time, semicolon, a march of knowledge, moved in nescience, and guarded in the form, a separate soul. So we see the soul being guarded in the form, the life form. And of course, in the life form, it would be animal, bird, early man. Its right to be immortal, it reserved, but built a wall against the siege of death and threw a hook to clutch eternity. So it doesn't want to die. It builds a wall against this siege of death, because don't forget, this is not a very strong life force here in this kingdom of the little life. And it even throws a hook, hoping to clutch eternity. Now, after that full stop, Sri Aurobindo tells us, a thinking entity appeared in space. A little ordered world broke into view, where being had prison room for act and sight, a floor to walk, a clear but scanty range. So all of this has happened now because this thinking entity finally appears in space. A thinking entity appeared in space. A little ordered world broke into view. Remember, previously there was no order in this kingdom of the little life. And now he says, as a result, being had prison room for act and sight. Well, we know what prison room is. It's a small enclosed room, usually with hardly any light at all. But being does have prison room here to act and to see. And it even has a floor to walk. But it has a clear but scanty range. Scanty means barely sufficient, meager, deficient in extent. An instrument personality was born. Notice that Sri Aurobindo hyphenates instrument personality. So it's not a personality itself, but it's an instrument personality was born, and a restricted, clamped intelligence consented to confine in narrow bounds its seeking. This clamped experience that we have, this is a restricted or a repressed intelligence. It is certainly restricted, and almost restricted and clamped could be synonymous, but I would say that it's a restricted and restrained or repressed clamped intelligence. What does that clamped intelligence do? It has consented to confine in narrow bounds its seeking. So it doesn't want to go very far or very high. It has consented to confine in these narrow bounds its seeking. Semicolon. It tied the thought to visible things, prohibiting the adventure of the unseen. Sri Aurobindo speaks to us about the unseen in the Mandukya Upanishad. The unseen with whom there can be no pragmatic relations, unseizable, featureless, unthinkable, undesignable by name, whose substance is the certitude of oneself, in whom world existence is stilled, who is all peace and bliss. That is the self. That is what must be known. So here, this unseen is capitalized. And this is mentioned by Sri Aurobindo in the Life Divine. So we see that it's tying the thought only to visible things, only to those things that we can touch, feel, see, taste, hear. And the soul's and prohibiting the adventure of the unseen and the soul's tread through unknown infinities. I'll go on just a little bit more, and then we'll ask someone to read. A reflex reason. Nature habits glass. Nature habit here. One word. A reflex reason, nature habits glass, illumined life to know and fix its field, accept a dangerous, ignorant brevity, and the inclusive purpose and the inconclusive purpose of its walk, and profit by the hour's precarious chance in the allotted boundaries of its fate. So, precarious, dangerous, subject to change or unknown conditions. Allotted is something allowed, designated. So we're going to end there because we have a lot for someone to read. Who may I ask to read this whole thing? Somebody volunteer, please.
I can read.
All right, wonderful.
At first he saw a dim, obscure mind power, moving concealed by matter and dumb life. A current thin, it streamed in life's vast flow, tossing and drifting under a drifting sky. Amid the surge and glimmering tremulous wash, released in splash of sense and feelings waves, in the in the deep midst of an insentient world, its huddled waves and foam of consciousness ran, pressing and eddying through a narrow strait, carrying experience in its crowded pace. It flowed, emerging into upper light from the deep pool of its subliminal birth, to reach some high existence still unknown. There was no thinking self, aim there was none. All was unorganized stress and seekings vague. Only to the unstable surface rose sensations, stabs, and edges of desire, and passion's leap and brief emotions' cries. A casual colloquy of flesh with flesh, a murmur of heart to longing wordless heart, glimmerings of knowledge with no shape of thought, and jets of subconscious will or hunger's pulse. All was dim, sparkle on a foaming top. It whirled around a drifting shadow surf, on an inconscient flood of force in time. Then came the pressure of a seeing power that drew all into a dancing turbid mass, circling around a single luminous point, center of reference in a conscious field, figure of a unitary light within. It lit the impulse of the half-sentient flood. Even an illusion gave of fixity, as if a sea could serve as a firm soil. That strange observing power imposed its sight. It forced on flux a limit and a shape. It gave its stream a lower narrow bank, drew lines to snare the spirit's formlessness. It fashioned the life mind of bird and beast, the answer of the reptile and the fish, the primitive pattern of the thoughts of man, a finite movement of the infinite, came winging its way through a wide air of time. A march of knowledge moved in nascence, and guarded in the form a separate soul. Its right to be immortal it reserved, but built a wall against the siege of death, and threw a hook to clutch eternity. A thinking entity appeared in space. A little ordered world broke into view, where being had prison room for act and sight, a floor to walk, a clear but scanty range. An instrument personality was born, and a restricted clamped intelligence, consented to confine in narrow bounds its seekings. It tied the thought to visible things, prohibiting the adventure of the unseen, and the soul's tread through unknown infinities. A reflex reason, nature's habits glass, nature habits glass, illumined life to know and fix its field, accept a dangerous ignorant brevity and the inconclusive purpose of its work, and profit by the hour's precarious chance, it in the allotted boundaries of its fate.
Thank you very much. Good reading. Good reading. Only thing I would suggest is the word infinite should be pronounced with the accent on in. Infinite,
In,
not infinite.
infinite.
Yes,
Infinite.
very good. That is the
Mm.
correct British pronunciation.
Infinite.
Very good.
Namaste.
Very good.
Thank you.
Good reading. Can I see my thing again, Vladimir? Can I see the people again? Ah, wonderful. Namaste, all. Thank you for bearing with this very difficult section. But we can see that there's a long way to go because there are 15 cantos in this book too. So he's taking us through all these lower ranges to eventually take us to the highest. And this is important for us to go through. He will have to go through many, many difficult areas, as Sri Aurobindo had to go. He will have to go into the realm of death, into the realm of falsehood, into the realm of the darkness.
But it produces a lot of thoughts which actually it generates the whole understanding of our being. It is productive of many more thoughts which are passing through together with these passages. It's not only these passages, it's not only going through kind of this realm, it just explains everything what we are. And even that mentioning that it generates these Spartan thoughts in man, it is from the beginning, it is there building up from that flux of and response of fish and bird is built from the beginning by the touch of the higher force, and all the structure is built by that attention of Purusha. A new sanctioned to Prakriti was sent, a new attention made, and that generated the structured world. It created a separate body for everyone to express itself. It's amazing. It's an amazing vision.
We see the evolution of the primal state of consciousness. It is an amazing journey through all of these planes of existence. Thank you all.
Thank you
Namaste.
so much.
Namaste. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.
Namaste. 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 Nam.